I want to talk about, get right into kind of like how I discovered what introduced me to that HBCU life. And like a lot of people, it began with the classics. What's up, everyone? Welcome to another Office Hour Tangents. I'm Brandan Craft. I usually don't state that in the beginning of these, but I'm Brandan, and I usually do these Office Hour Tangents when I'm in class with my students and I go off on a tangent. But this tangent doesn't come strictly from one of the tangents I went off in class. This tangent came from a discussion I had kind of centering on, I'm a football fan, right? So I've been watching football last week. A lot of the power conferences, they played HBCUs. Most of them got hammered. But it got me thinking about just my experience with HBCUs in general. And when I was talking in class and I brought up HBCUs, most of my students, either like half my students really didn't know what the term meant, didn't know what that HBCU stood for, historically black college or university. And then the other half maybe knew that, but that was all they knew. And, you know, I started talking about it a little bit. I didn't go off on the tangent I wanted to go on. So I was like, let me save it for Office Hour Tangent. So here we go. And I'm just going to start off with just HBCU 101. This is not a lesson on the history of HBCUs and all that good stuff. This is not that. I'm going to talk about my experience with HBCUs. I spent some time as an undergraduate at HBCU. I spent some time as a professor at an HBCU. And I want to talk about kind of like what got me interested in exploring the HBCU experience. All right. So really quick, HBCUs were founded, of course, because not too long ago, I don't want to say a long time ago, but not too long ago, just black people, they weren't allowed to go to the colleges or universities they wanted to. And at a certain point, they couldn't go to any. So HBCUs kind of spawned from a need for black people to get a higher education. Okay, in a nutshell. Most of them are located in what we would consider the South, but there are some in the North. We have, I'm from Columbus, Ohio, so we have Central State in Ohio. We have Wilberforce also right across the street from there. So there are some HBCUs in the kind of the northern hemisphere, but most of them are kind of located in the southeast of the country, and for obvious reasons, right? They're still necessary. So a lot of the, and I'm just gonna get right on it. I'm gonna touch on this kind of concept going forward probably, and I'm just freestyling here. But a lot of times, if I do get into discussions about HBCUs, especially with other black folk that went to PWIs, and if you didn't know what PWI stood for, it's a predominantly white institution. But, you know, sometimes we'll have some lively discussions on the merits of HBCUs because it's not widely accepted that we still need HBCUs. I would argue that they're still necessary and there's still a big need for them, but I'm not going to use this platform to kind of get into that discussion. Okay, but there is a discussion to be had along those lines. But I want to get right into kind of like how I discovered what introduced me to that HBCU life. And like a lot of people, it began with the classics. Okay, so if you ever heard of something like in my hometown, Columbus, Ohio, they used to have the Capital City Classic every year. And it was usually at the beginning of the football season, and it pitted Central State or another HBCU against, a fellow HBCU, and they would play a game in like Cooper Stadium, which was our baseball stadium back in the day, or I think they had some at, I'm not sure if they put it in the Horseshoe at Ohio State, but I seem to remember that towards the end there, they were putting it, they were having that game right in the Horseshoe, which was dope. And they just made it a weekend. It was almost like a little mini homecoming. So it'd be the Capital City Classic, or when I went to Alabama A&M University, they have the and I'm gonna get these all wrong. So, but I think it was called the Magic City Classic. and that was in Birmingham. But then you have the Circle City Classic. You have all these classics that kind of go on throughout these cities. So I kind of got introduced to the HBCU life with these classics at a very young age. And then these classics, you know, you would have two HBCUs. You would see the bands, which is a big deal, and I'll get into that a little later. And then on the off days, you know, on the Friday before and the Sunday after, you have parties, you have tailgates. And it was just a cool vibe that growing up, it was normal to me. But it was just like a bunch of black people going to a football game, and the football game was just had a little different vibe than the football games I was used to going to, right? The band had a bigger, way larger focus than the game, and it was almost like a family reunion atmosphere. So that kind of drew me into it. Not necessarily to say at that time I was like, oh, I want to go to a HBCU, but a couple other things came down the line. The Cosby Show and Different World. So the Cosby Show, pretty much everybody watching, my little 25 viewers, the Cosby Show, right? The Cosby Show, they went to, Cliff Huxtable went to Hillman College. And I remember watching it back in the day, and this is, you know, we didn't have Google. So it was like Hillman, and it was almost like at that age, I just thought Hillman was a real college. And they had some episodes where they were like at the college. And I just thought it was real until I got old enough to realize it wasn't real. But it was real enough to me that I thought it was cool. Like, oh, man, this successful man that has a family, became a doctor, and he actually went to one of these HBCUs that I was just kind of going to the classics and seeing. So I was starting to kind of like put things together. And it just kind of, I gained more interest, but I still wasn't like, I'm going to go there. A movie came out called School Daze. And I don't know my timeline. I don't know if it came out before Different World came out or after or about the same time. But the movie School Daze was more like Different World was more of it was a sitcom, right? It was lighthearted. It touched on some serious subjects sometimes, but it was a sitcom, 30-minute sitcom. But School Daze was a Spike Lee joint. So, you know, if it's a Spike Lee joint, it had some serious tones. It really got into Greek life. It really got into colorism. It really just it got into more of the grit of what it may be like to kind of go to a HBCU. And I would say that almost sold me. I was kind of like ready. Like, I think I might want to go to a HBCU when I graduate. And then we'll put it over top. I belong to an organization, and shout out to the Alpha Esquires, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. So before I became a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, I was an Alpha Esquire. And that's basically a junior level organization sponsored by the grad chapter in the area. And they just kind of like teach us how to be better men, you know, how to tie a tie. They taught us good etiquette. We did programs. We did community service. We would go to these classics, and we had paraphernalia on, and it was just a really good program. So I was just a part of that and a part of it with them, and that kind of sold it. So when it came time for me to graduate, I decided to go to Alabama A&M. So my freshman year, I attended Alabama A&M University, the Bulldogs. And I left after my freshman year, and I transferred to the University of Pittsburgh. And I won't get too much into why I did that. I'll get into why I did that. I think it's interesting. But that year I spent at A&M was one of the best years I had in my life. Like, I had a ball at A&M, but it wasn't. You know, I was getting a good education. I was having fun, but what was most valuable about my experience in my undergrad experience at a HBCU was that was the first time ever in my life where I looked around to my left, to my right, up, down, everywhere, and I would say almost everyone was black at an academic level. So at an academic institution, all the students were black. All the faculty were black. Like almost all the faculty were black. All the administration was black. It was like, where do you ever see that in society. Whereas for me, I never saw that. That was the first time I kind of witnessed that. And that alone was very, very powerful. Representation is a powerful thing. And me seeing that an academic level institution, a high level, and it was black run, black everywhere, and it was just like, that was just powerful for me. That was very powerful to see that can exist, and it was dope. Because the thing is, and this is like, I'm only talking about me, I'm not projecting to anything else, is, you could be raised in a certain neighborhood in certain circumstances, whether, with a lot of means or no means or right in the middle. But, if you're surrounded, if you're always the minority, it kind of starts to dictate how you interact in society. You just get used to being a minority. And I see that all the time. You probably see that all the time. Like, minorities start to act like minorities because they're just used to being the minority. The minority usually has less power than the majority. The minority usually has to kowtow. I don't want to say kowtow, but it usually has to defer to the majority. The majority usually makes the rules. The majority usually owns most of the stuff. And you just kind of get used to being a minority, and you're almost comfortable being in it. Not saying that experience changed that for me, because years and years and years of that, it doesn't really change overnight, right? But it changed me enough to see more possibilities. And it was just powerful. That alone, black people everywhere at 7:30 a.m., going to class. And it was the same thing. You had people that was sleeping in. You had people that was acting up. You had your scholars. You had your athletes. It was just dope. It was just that alone right there just made it a really, really, really dope experience. And to this day, even though I was there for that 1 year, I still consider myself a Bulldog. I would say even more so. I won't say more so, but just as equally as I consider myself a Panther going to Pitt. I actually graduated from Pitt. But that 1 year in A&M was very transformative. It was so transformative that after I left, so let me talk about why I left. And just to be real, I left. It was one of the first kind of adult decisions that I made. The first adult decision I made was to go to A&M. I chose to go to A&M sight unseen. I didn't take a visitation. I didn't meet with anybody. I actually went there to play baseball. I didn't even meet with the coach. I talked to him briefly on the phone. And my family drove down there, and that was the first time I seen the campus. And I was cool with it, but it was I didn't really look into what I wanted to do as a major, right? So just like a lot of people, senior year, I was kind of like in limbo. I kind of grew up. I talked about this in probably previous podcasts, but I'm an artist. I've always been the artist. I'm that guy, in class that was the art guy. Like, usually if you have a class of 20 kids, there's like 1 or 2 kids that can draw. And that was me. I was the guy. I was the artist of the month. That's the class I like to go to the most, K through 12. But when I got around junior, senior year, I started to panic. Like, I don't know how people make money doing art. I didn't know any artists. I didn't have access to any artist. I didn't have in my family or in my circle. So I kind of panicked when I went to school. I mean, I think I chose the school before I chose a major, but I chose the school, and then I decided I was going to major in computer science, because at the time, that was 1995. At the time, that was it was burgeoning, and it was like, yo, be a computer science, and you're going to be able to do this, do that. And I chose computer science. But when I got there, and, I was at my lower level computer science class, and I'm not clowning anything, but at the moment, I remember the teacher for pretty much the whole semester was kind of teaching us code on the chalkboard. And I want to say I panicked a little bit, and I wasn't panicking at the time, because for all I know, that's how you start learning code, is kind of on the chalkboard, which was cool. I was learning about if else, if and statements, arrays, all that stuff, but he was doing it on the board. And we went to the computer lab like once to kind of see something happen. But then I got a call from one of my best friends who went to Pitt. And we was talking, blah, blah, blah. He was like, I was like, what y'all doing right now? He's like, man, we in the computer lab. And it was like midnight. And he's like, we in the computer lab, like looking up stuff. And I was like, oh, y'all got a computer lab? And he's like, man, we got like 7 of them. And like, these are they're open 24/7 and blah, blah, blah. And then I like researched, and now that I think about it, then I'd like research like Pitt and their computer science program. And I saw it was like a really, really good computer science program. And not saying that the A&M one wasn't, but I know that we didn't have 7 computer labs. So at that moment, and I was doing well in baseball. I was having a ball. I really was. It was really socially and academically. As far as my grade, I had a 3.7 at the time. There was really no reason to leave. But I remember that conversation and not having access to computer labs whenever I wanted them. That made me transfer. That made me start the process of transferring, because I started thinking about like, okay, baseball's cool, but I don't think I'm going to kind of make it to the majors. I thought I could, but I'm like, I got to start thinking alternatives. So I decided to transfer to Pitt for that main reason. There's other reasons, but that was the main reason, was like access to technology. And that proved to be very important to me. So I decided to leave, and then I went to a PWI. I went to Pitt, and as soon as I go there, I'm a computer science major still. But then I soon changed my major to architectural studies, because I kind of wanted to be an architect a lot of that time, and I kind of panicked and went into computer science. But Pitt had an architecture program, so I changed my major. And all those classes, most of those classes were in the Frick Fine Arts building, and I was back to, so I went from everybody black in every department everywhere to now I was back to something that was actually comfortable to me. I was back to, I'm the only black person in the whole department that I noticed. And, you know, somebody watching this out of my 25 years, like, I was there too. It might have been 2 of us, but I just remember, like, all my classes, I would be the only black person in the class or in the lecture hall, so on and so forth, in that department. And it was normal to me. And I remember thinking, like, I don't know if this should be normal, you know? But I'm thinking of the world. I'm thinking of our country. I'm like, well, this should be the normal, because it's like this in more places than it's not in this country, right? But yeah, it was a stark transition. It was less familial. It was less like a family. You know, we had like the Black Student Union, the Black Action Society, all that stuff, but it wasn't the same as the whole campus. Like, you don't need a Black Action Society at a HBCU. You don't need a Black Student Union at a HBCU. Some people say you don't need a Black Student Union at a PWI, but you definitely do. You just need somewhere to go where it's familiar. It just helps with the learning process. It helps you be more comfortable, right? It's not separation. It's just comfort. That's all. And so transferred. I graduated from Pitt. Boom, 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 boom. Went through, got a job, became a grown-up, did all the grown-up stuff, went back to school, got my master's. And then I started teaching as a TA, and then I actually turned that into being a professional professor. And my first professional gig being a professor was at Florida A&M University. And I was there for 5 years as a professor. So I consider myself a rattler also. And my experience at FAMU was also powerful, because it was back to, and FAMU is a much larger university than A&M was. So it's like, boom, I'm back to like all black faculty, all black staff. And I want to say all black, mostly black faculty, mostly black staff, mostly black students. And it was just, and I'm teaching all black class, mostly black class. And that was a change of pace. But I loved the way the students looked at me. Because at the time, I think I was 29 when I started teaching. And I was a young looking 29. You know, I kind of looked like them. But it was like, I loved the way they was looking at me and interacting with me in those first couple weeks, because it was almost like he's like us. Like, he's not like an old professor. You know, it's a lot of that. He's like us, and he knows this and he knows technology. And I was I've always been, the web guy, the code guy, all that good stuff. And he's a tech guy, and he's young. And I was an athlete. I was still athletic. And I'm not saying that I changed any of their perspectives, but I like to think that I did, because I posed a question one day in class, and I asked them, I was like, and these are all black kids. And I'm like, how many black teachers, count all the black teachers you've had since kindergarten. And, they start counting. Then I was like, count how many black male teachers you've had since kindergarten. Teachers or professors. And almost half of them were like, none. And if it was one, half of those kids, it was the gym teacher. Right? And then there was a big swath of the kids that never had a black male teacher in their life. And that was prophetic to me. And then I had to think about how many black male teachers that I had. And I was like, I had one. Right? I had one, and I had one principal. And both of them changed my life. One was Mr. Sherwood in high school, and he ran the shop class. I forgot the name of the class, but it was drafting. It was like the drafting class, where I was a T-square and, the triangles, and we were creating like perspective drawings, and we were in the wood shop making stuff. And that's what I love to do. And he kind of just introduced me to that world. He taught me how to write real neat. And he was like, oh man, he changed my life. I wish rest in peace, Mr. Sherwood. And then the other one was Mr. Taylor. And he was the principal of my middle school. And he just looked out for me. He made sure I didn't fall through the cracks. He just made sure, he probably did that for all the kids, but I took it personal. He liked me more. He liked me a lot. Right? And it was just because he looked like me. He looked like my uncles. He knew my mom. It was just familiar. But those are the only two black male kind of teachers / principals I've had. And they both had big effects on my life. Right? So then at that moment, I started thinking of me being that for some of these kids, maybe. And if that's possible, that's dope. I just thought that would be dope. And then it made me being a professor seem like a way more important gig. Okay. And, but yeah, I'm just looking at some notes so I don't get too far off the track. I go on these tangents. But some of the things you just experience when you're on a black campus, I keep on mentioning that family atmosphere. And if you see any interviews at HBCUs, they always talk about a family atmosphere, but it is right. You get to know the name. They get to know your name. You know the name. They almost become like aunties and uncles. And it is really like that. And it extends beyond graduation. The homecoming. Homecoming is a big deal. Every HBCU I've been on, there's always a big deal for the homecoming. You have that Battle of the Bands, which is very unique. They don't really have that at PWIs. You also have the classics. I mentioned the classic I went to, but most of these HBCUs, if they have a football team, they have some kind of classic and some kind of rivalry with another HBCU, and then they kind of come together and they have a classic, which basically turns into a football band-focused family reunion. It's just a family reunion. There's catfish being fried. There's line dances. There's Granny with the full pink and green outfit and the AKA sneakers and socks, right? And shoestrings, and they're everywhere, and it's just popping, and it's just it's a familial atmosphere. Most of these HBCUs I've been to, they have something called the Ave, or just where everybody kind of hangs out, and it's like every day. And it's something to look forward to in between classes. And I understand that most colleges have that, But since it was just a little different because of that familial atmosphere. So the Ave, I used to have a great time on the Ave at A&M's campus. We called it the Ave. You had the Alphas, you had the Omegas, you had the Kappas, you had the AKAs, you had the Deltas, you had the Sigma Gamma Rhos, you had the Zetas, and a little later you had the Iotas. And that was just another family. So if I was on the baseball team, that was a family. Then if I would have happened to be, you know, an alpha or something, that would be another family. And you belong to certain clubs and stuff, and those would be families. And there's all these kind of familial kind of things you can be a part of. And then you have step shows, and you have stroll competitions. And, you know, there's always something going on that was just centered on just black culture. And it's one of those things, like after those 4 years, and then you get out into the world, it's almost like some of those people that went to HBCU, you would never be a part of that kind of atmosphere ever again. That really doesn't exist anywhere else in society. And as I'm saying that, I try not to make definitive statements on platforms like this, because all it takes is somebody to like, oh no, we have that over here and this over there. I get it. But an academic institution that is ran and attended by black people is very unique. And you don't find that a lot of places. Now, I'm not going to talk about all the good stuff and all, you know, the stuff, but there's so much good stuff. But one of the things that I did notice, just being an undergraduate and being a professor, more so being a professor, is, you know, HBCUs don't usually, some of them do, but usually they don't have the funding that the PWIs have. So it's really stark in Tallahassee, for instance. You have Florida A&M University and Florida State, and they're virtually across the street from each other. And it's really a kind of trip. It's kind of a mind trip to think that FAMU is on this side of an actual railroad tracks, and Florida State is on this side. They're on two sides of the tracks, but they're right next to each other. But they're very separate, like very separate, and it's kind of wild, right? But it's kind of a glimpse into the society we live in, basically. But the HBCUs, and from my experience, they don't have the funding, right? And that leads to some of the things that I think that led to, like, my decision to leave Alabama A&M. At the time, I wasn't thinking like, oh, they don't have the funding and all that stuff. But they didn't have 7 computer labs. They didn't have like 2 Mac labs and PC labs, right? And they just didn't have the funding at the time to pull that off, right? Also, you know, I remember this was 1995, so it's a long time ago, but, you know, when we was registering for classes, this is another thing. When I was talking to my boy who was at Pitt, when we had to register for classes, we had to, you know, go to the gym. We had to stay in lines. It was like very old school with pencil and paper, and we had to stand in line for hours, like literally hours, in a non-air conditioned gym. And we were still kicking it, though. It was like, because everybody's in there, we was just hanging out, but it was hot and it was long and it was all day. Then I talked to my boy and I tell him that story, and he's like, wow, that sounds crazy. And I'm like, well, what y'all do? He's like, oh, we just registered for our classes on this website. And this is even before I was even into websites and stuff. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, y'all stand in lines? Like, I remember feeling a little embarrassed when he was telling me that, but it didn't outweigh. Still at that time, it didn't outweigh like the positives, right? But it was something, since I was thinking about going into a tech laden field. That was something that I was concerned with, no doubt. The funding is something that HBCUs struggle with. It really does. Some of the discussions. So when I was a professor, some of the discussions I could have with a all black class. And when I say almost all black, because I will always have a white student or two. I would. And that was actually dope, because it just brought some levity. It just leveled it out. It brought a different perspective. to the classroom, but it was predominantly black. So the discussions are different. So the discussions I would have in a classroom at FAMU would go different pathways than a discussion I would have here, for instance, right? Or when I was teaching at Ohio State, or I was teaching at a community college. It was just the discussions would go different ways, and there were more shared experiences amongst the students and with me, right? Whereas when I teach here, it's more so like we do have shared experiences, but the shared experiences are more professional. Like we're all artists, we're all creatives. And then when we get off into tangents where we're kind of talking about things other than, what's contained within the major, it's we're usually talking about differences, right? And we're talking about each other's differences, like even within the class, because there's all these different kind of people, and then me. Okay, so that was the difference, and that's a difference, and it's a different dynamic. Another thing that I noticed as, teaching that 5 years at FAMU, more students, and I'm not saying a lot of students keep in contact with me, but more students from FAMU keep in contact than I have at any other institutions I've taught at. Right. And it's because it was just more of a family type thing. Now there were overcrowded classrooms. Like I'm not painting this rosy picture. One of the reasons that I chose to move on from FAMU, even though I love my FAMU family there, but I chose to move on because I was consistently, just we as a faculty was consistently teaching a lot of classes, and every class was overcrowded. It was just overcrowded classrooms, and it was a lot of classes. And that just started weighing on me. And then kind of like, because of the funding issue, because of things like that, I kind of wanted to do some things, progressive technology led things that I just couldn't get them to move fast enough. Like, it's like we needed to do it 2 years ago, and I'm still fighting for it. So when an opportunity came where it was like, hey, we want you to like help write an online program, and I just had to take that opportunity because that was the direction I needed to go. Okay, so it's not all rosy, but those are some of the challenges. But thanks for listening to my tangent for the day. I think it was an interesting one, and if you want to put something in the comments, ask any questions, do so. I don't mind. But I think I have a unique kind of take on the whole HBCU experience, just being an undergrad, teaching there, kind of coming in, leaving type of thing. So hopefully this is valuable to someone out there. And until next time, peace.